It's time to strap in for another edition of the CarsGuide Podcast, the show that takes you beyond the test drive. This is episode number 218, Best Hybrids coming in 2022. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James Cleary, and joining me in looking at the fresh dual power models heading towards Aussie showrooms this year are Deputy News Editor Justin Hilliard.
Hello.
And key contributing journalist, Mr. Stephen Ottley.
Hello.
We'll also take a look at the fresh metal we've been driving this week and dive into your feedback. YouTubers, you can jump ahead via the time codes in the notes or click on the chapter markers in the timeline. So let's get underway. Best Hybrids, a story authored over the break by our own Tom White. He rightly makes the point that they are something of a hot topic in Australia, an explosion of new models in the last few years, and obviously a consumer appetite for this kind of car as a stepping stone on towards more serious pure electric type cars. And he says, it's not only you'll cut down your fuel bills, people are concerned about lower emissions, save the planet, all of that stuff. And his story actually ran to a list of a dozen, and we're going to touch on each one. And we'll kick off with the first one that we have touched on in other podcasts. So quickly, maybe it's almost like an update. It's the Cupra Formentor. And tell me, Justin, initially we had Leon, but are we calling it Attica now, or am I getting my Cupras mixed up?
No, two separate models there. So you've got the small hatchback, which is your Golf equivalent, basically, and then a small SUV as well. So they're launching with two small SUVs, one being bigger, slightly bigger than the other. Yeah.
And it is the Attica, isn't it? Or is it?
Is it Attica or Ateca?
Yeah, that's it. We're waiting for someone to put us straight on the pronunciation. Anyway, since this story first appeared, our own Tung, our man in Europe, specifically Dublin, has driven the Formentor. So people are able to see what he makes of it on the site, and there's a video as well on YouTube. We know that one's coming, and it's a Spanish kind of performance spin-off mark under the VW group that's come out of SEAT, and we're looking forward to that. Steve, what do you make of Cupra's arrival?
I think it's a smart tactic to come with something a little bit different. Like obviously Volkswagen Group has enough brands here, so Cupra needed to do something different, and so launching with hybrids, performance focused hybrids, I think is a smart move.
Yep. Cool. Okay, good. Let's because we've touched on those already, let's just move on to the next one. Ford Escape, the Escape is one of the most hotly contested market segments of all. It's not far away. We're saying first quarter, Justin. I think that's still on schedule.
As far as I know, early this year.
And Tom makes the point that Ford's been a bit slow off the mark to get some electrified models into this market. So it's been delayed already due to some battery issues. It's built in Spain. We were just talking about Cupra, but it's following a bit of a Toyota model with a 2.5 litre Atkinson cycle petrol engine, and with a battery making its contribution, an electric motor, 50 kilometres electric only driving range. Is that enough?
It'd be interesting to see how it performs, but I just can't see it being anything but a low volume player in that segment. I mean, Escape kind of struggles for traction as it is anyway, let alone a PHEV version that's going to have an even smaller audience. So obviously wish that it does well, but I'm not 100% sure there's going to be a lot of appetite for it.
Potentially, I mean, it's CX-5 and RAV4 that just swamp that part of the market, no matter what kind of powertrain you're talking about. It's just hard. It's a steep mountain to climb, really, isn't it?
And being a plug-in, it's a bit more expensive too, so that also plays into it as well.
I just think it's I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. The problem for Ford is that just why wouldn't you buy a RAV4 or a CX-5? It's you've got to convince people to step out of something that they're probably already in, or they know someone who's in it. Like Escape, it's just kind of on the fringe there. So I think
We're talking about butting heads with Toyota. Next up, Santa Fe Hybrid, Hyundai. Finally getting a hybrid version of the Santa Fe. It's what we're going to call a self-charging Toyota style, so no plug-in. The engine does a big job in terms of charging up the battery and all of that. No PHEV slated for this market. And it's a small engine, Justin, 1.6 litre turbo with the electric motor, but 350 Newton meters torque isn't to be sneezed at. That seems like a pretty good combo.
And I think the difference is with the Hyundai and Kia hybrid systems versus a Toyota is these are turbocharged engines they're playing with, right? So, that gives it a little bit of extra boost from the engine itself before you even add the electric motor into the equation. So that's a bit of a point of difference. And I think unlike the Escape PHEV, something like a Santa Fe Hybrid, stands to do quite well in that segment, kind of like what we've already seen with Kluger Hybrid, one of its competitors.
It's a bit of a engineering high wire act, isn't it? When you start to bring turbos, a turbo engine with the electric motor, all of that, orchestrating all of that into a refined kind of powertrain. That's a real challenge. So it'd be interesting to drive.
Now, correct me if I'm mistaken, they originally sort of played down the chances of a hybrid Santa Fe with this generation. So I think it kind of speaks to, like you said, this story, we're talking about a dozen cars here. Yeah. I think we've seen, it's interesting to me, is this a question of, have consumers demanded this, or have car companies got more access to these hybrid models? But I think, we've seen with RAV4, it's just become it's been so popular, the hybrid version of the RAV4, that other brands are like, well, let's have one. And that's, I think, where we see, this Santa Fe's come from. That sort of, we better just join the crowd. I think it also plays to a phrase that we've used regularly on this podcast, which is, you never know. Oh no, it's not coming here. Definitely not coming here. And certainly not in this generation. Oh, it's here. That kind of stuff. So you never know. The next one is a really interesting one. Jeep, of all brands, and the Grand Cherokee. Third quarter, a plug-in hybrid. Now, we've been calling them regularly PHEV, PHEV. That doesn't seem to have much traction with consumers. And Jeep has gone for calling it the 4xe. So 4 lowercase x lowercase e, 4xe is what they're calling it, to put it into Jeep parlance. Plug-in variants, they're still going to have V8s available in the Grand Cherokee, but these plug-in variants, we're putting the position that it's probably replacing the diesel engine versions of the Grand Cherokee. And this thing's going to be able to tow just over 2.7 tons, 637 Newton meters of torque. So Jeep needs to stay true to its loyal base, I suppose, in going this way.
Well, on the topic of Grand Cherokee, it was only yesterday that Jeep actually released pricing for the Grand Cherokee L, which is the 7-seat version. And look, Jeep's a premium brand now. I mean, that car kicks off at 82 grand and goes all the way up to 115. And that's with the V6, because Australia misses out on the V8 that's available elsewhere. Right. So it's 115 grand, and the plug-in is going to cost more than that. So we could be potentially talking about it, $130,000 Grand Cherokee plug-in, or 4xe, as they like to call it. It's a lot of money.
That seems, how should I put that? That seems maybe optimistic. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sort of thinking
borderline courageous.
Yeah. Well, there's a fine line between, was it the fine line between bravery and insanity? Like it's, that's a questionable. But I mean, overall, I think that strategy of Jeeps is good. I guess it's a more premium offering. Obviously, it's a desperately needed update. The current Grand Cherokee is both old and had a bit of a rocky road at times. Sort of kind of appropriate, I guess, for a Jeep. But they just they need something. I'm not sure that if they're potentially pricing themselves out of the market, but certainly that looks like they're interested in exciting. It's an interesting, exciting new model for that brand.
I mean, to labour the military analogy there, Steve, I know one did go under the tracks of a tank at one point, if you recall, disgruntled owner. Anyway, talk about travails. Yeah. That's cool. Then we're back to South Korea and Kia Sorento Hybrid. And this will be a plug-in. And then we'll have what we'll call a regular hybrid, so the self-charging hybrid. And again, using that same powertrain as Santa Fe. So going through the group, what do you make of that? Kia is on a roll,
Yeah. It's kind of similar to that Santa Fe hybrid we were talking about. I mean, the PHEV version of the Sorento launched late last year. I think it was October. and now we're waiting the self-charging hybrid version. But, obviously very similar to the Santa Fe hybrid we were talking about, which again means you get that turbo engine as part of the package as well. So yeah, stands to do quite well. But as with Santa Fe, the issue is always going to be supply. How many can they get for Australia? Because they'll surely have way more demand than they will supply for the short term.
Yes. All right.
I can't remember who it was. Someone recently wrote a fabulous article I thought was really incisive. But I mean, this is I think it was maybe it was me. I can't remember. But yeah, it was, as a brand, this is a real step forward for Kia. They've gone from, not that long ago being the, quote unquote, cheap and cheerful brand, pushing into electrification is the next big step for them. And I think they're doing it the right way. Cars like the Sorento are volume models that, diesel's on the nose now. It's sort of the time is right. And it'll be interesting to see, the EV6 arriving. Like, is this really like the next step that, pushes Kia from, I mean, I guess it's already a mainstream brand, but it's really pushes it up at another level.
Yes. Well, I mean, okay, you want to talk about another level. This next one, it's not really about the environment. It's probably not about saving on fuel bills. I think it's very much about performance, and that's the Merc-AMG GT63 SE Performance. So second half of this year, this thing is mental. So you've still got your 4-litre V8 and 150 kilowatt electric motor. So 620 kilowatts, 1,400 Newton meters. Where is this torque arms race going to end?
So you're suggesting this isn't a Prius competitor?
You love
a hot take. That is,
show me a Prius that goes 0 to 100 in 2.9 seconds. And this thing is only going to have a electric only range of 12 kilometers. So it's patently about upping the performance equation. So extraordinary. Again, it raises that big question in why in Australia, why anywhere? That's a heck of a lot of torque. Its party trick is going to be that straight line acceleration, I suspect.
Well, I think this sort of speaks to the other side of hybrid that we're seeing, in the performance space. I think, we've sort of touched on it with Cupra a little bit, but there are performance benefits that can be gained from having an electric motor. We've seen Lamborghini have hybrids, Ferrari has a hybrid. Like there's capacity for hybrids, and every brand wants a hybrid, even if it's like, runs counter to their DNA, like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. But there's, every brand I think has to have one in this day and age. And there's obviously, there's two different applications for it: performance and economy. And
I suppose one of the things to say there, it doesn't really bring down your corporate average fuel economy. That one's not going to make much of a contribution. It's all about that blistering speed.
Yeah, and I think the really interesting thing about the AMG plug-in hybrid system is it very much is unlike any other that we'd really seen up until this point. I mean, you're talking about a relatively small battery, 6.1 kilowatt hours. We're seeing some plugins come out with 30 kilowatt hour batteries now. Like, even when it was in its infancy, that is still a very small battery, but it's clearly geared towards performance. I believe off the top of my head, they've made it so that the battery is essentially never going to be depleted. So you're always going to have that electric boost no matter what. Obviously the engine will charge it and regenerative braking and things like that, but if you want to fully charge it, plug it in, sure, but it's always going to have some sort of reserve ready to stick the right boot in and get that 1,400 Newton meters working for you. It's it's crazy.
Amazing.
The claim is still 8.6, which for 1,400 Newton meters, I'll take 8.6 liters. I mean, you're not going to achieve that, I don't think. I think that's probably optimistic again. That's one of those,
And Tom makes the point that it's something of a sleeper in the sense that it doesn't look a heck of a lot different to any other, to other models in that GT four-door lineup. So that's interesting in itself.
To your point about the 8.6, Ottley, I mean, if you're spending $500,000 on that car, I don't think you care what your fuel bill is.
But it's just,
Here's an old campaigner. This is a stalwart of the hybrid market. The Outlander, Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV. It's this one though. Where are we? It's a price and a spec hike because the Outlander PHEV's been around for a while. It'll have a new platform under it. It's going to be larger than the outgoing model, and you can have plug-in hybrid with 7 seats for the first time. So that's a bit of a breakthrough for the Outlander. So it'll give it a new burst of life.
Yeah, the Outlander PHEV, the previous original one, sold surprisingly well in Australia, and I think it's probably because there are a few fleet deals involved there,
right,
boosting those numbers up. But it still found a surprisingly large audience, and it was an innovator in that segment when it comes to plug-in technology, right? So
yes,
they've already got that experience. They've applied it to a new platform, new model. It'll be interesting to see if more private buyers step up and pay the premium to get into it.
Yeah,
particularly when you can have a RAV4 hybrid for less, and you don't have to worry about a plug.
My first experience of the Outlander PHEV was not for the first time sitting in the gutter or sitting on the gutter, waiting to be picked up by a colleague and a car swap. And so I was more or less at eye and ear level of the car as it pulled up, and I just heard that whirring noise. Thought, oh my God, the future's arrived. And that was some time ago, when you're having those kinds of thoughts. So it's been around a while.
It's been around a very long time. And I think in some ways, Mitsubishi doesn't get enough credit for sort of, making the move. They're probably maybe slightly ahead of its time in a lot of respects.
Yep. All right. Now, here's another one that's around the performance end of the spectrum. Volkswagen Touareg R. So it's a replacement for the outgoing V8 diesel, 3-litre V6 turbo. So again, the turbo combustion engine with an electric motor, 340 kilowatts, which is plenty, 700 Newton meters, which is half the Merc AMG, but still an immense number.
So what a tiny number.
Let's
call it
paltry. A puny 700 Newton meters.
Yeah.
This time, though, you've got 47 kilometres of all-electric range, so that might cover some people's kind of urban commute or whatever they're doing. And it was held up a little bit because it wasn't able to cope, or our fuel was too rubbish for the car. But we're expecting it in the fourth quarter of 2022. So that'll be an interesting one too.
Yeah. I mean, look, for someone like myself who, doesn't do a lot of rain around these days, I mean, 47 kilometers is probably perfectly fine.
What about driving? Do you do much driving?
Trust me, I do not do a lot of rain.
All the running around.
I think it's, and then to have that performance, it's a sort of sounds like it's going to be an appealing kind of, family vehicle, for someone who, the mums and dads out there who want space, but also, a big old chunk of torque.
Yes.
And I think 40, that 50K mark is probably realistically pretty good for most people, I agree.
The average Australian commutes 32 kilometers a day. So theoretically for most people, it's going to do the trick.
Thanks to our stats man, Justin. Well done.
Always.
But, probably again, I think a lot of these hybrids are a direct, result of the, diesel emission scandal. I think diesels had to be phased out from a lot of brands, and obviously Volkswagen is an obvious one,
Cool. Yes, it's a good way for them to go. And look, another player that's been in and around this space for a little while now is Volvo. So we're going to have different versions of XC60 and XC90 Recharge, larger batteries, which translates to extended driving range, and a power boost for the electric motors. So like a push to pass button, I imagine it must be, which would be nice. It's still reserved for these top spec T8 versions. And just to that range conversation here, we're talking 68 kilometres electric only for the XC60, 72 kilometres for the XC90. So that's getting even more useful from a hybrid point of view.
Potentially do 2 commutes with that, 2 days of commuting. So, they've, again, much like Mitsubishi with Outlander PHEV, Volvo's been a leader in this segment pretty much since day dot when it comes to plug-in SUVs in a premium sense. So this is a big leap for them in that regard with battery range and all that kind of stuff. So be interesting to see how it goes.
Totally. And we've been talking about established players, but in terms of newcomers, Haval, the H6 hybrid, and we've been talking about dollars in terms of what it might take to get into these hybrids. So we've expecting when the H6 launched in 2021, there was going to be a hybrid variant was promised down the track, and sure enough, we're going to have a self-charging style hybrid H6, 179 kilowatts, 530 Newton meters, which is not bad for an Haval H6. That car's going to get up and run pretty well. 1.5 litre petrol, an engine, but I suppose the missing link is what it's going to cost. Have you got any mail on that, Justin?
I do actually, hot off the press.
Okay,
the price is, so it's only available in the Ultra grade, which is the top grade that you can get in the H6 range, and it is $44,990 drive away, which when you compare it to how much a RAV4 top of the range costs on the roads, again, we're talking about something that's 5 to 10 grand cheaper, depending on which way you go with the variant. So, that's going to be convincing for a lot of people. And unlike RAV4, you would assume that there's going to be quite a bit of supply of this car.
You might be able to actually get one in the near future. Yeah,
exactly. That's right. And again, with those outputs, particularly that torque output, go and compare it to RAV4, it is definitely on paper a little punchier. We'll see how it drives in reality. But, when it arrives in the coming weeks, I think for a lot of people, it'll at least get them walking in the showroom and checking it out for sure.
Yep. Yeah. That's good. Now we're into the home straight here, but Honda, we've had a lot to say about Honda in all kinds of ways in recent podcasts, but here they are back with a Civic Hybrid. It's going to be a self-charging style system, and they're calling it eHEV is the nomenclature. And we're talking 50 odd K. So the proxy being that a VTI LX version already costs $47,200 drive away. So the best guess is that this thing's going to be up around $50,000. With Honda's transformation, I wonder where that fits into the scheme of things.
I think that, there's a lot made of it, of the transformation and the change of business and all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, that's just a lot of money for a small car. Like it's just, it just is, it's a hybrid, sure, but it's effectively a, small to mid-size sedan. Like it's not really, it's like, the Hyundai Ioniq fully electric car was that sort of money a few years ago. So
yes,
I just think that is, if anything, I get that it's transparent. I get that the whole business model's changed, but I think you're just going to have consumers looking at it and saying that's a lot of money for the car I get.
Yeah. It's a fair call.
The thing with Civic, if you forget about the price and the lack of a range, being a single variant currently, it's a really damn good car. But the one saving grace potentially of the eHEV is there's a bit of a rumor going around that they're going to try and position it as more of a kind of a warm hatch by having a 2-liter engine in it based around that hybrid system. So it'll have, pretty decent outputs potentially, more in line with like a Sorento GT or something like that. So if they position it more as a warm hatch, still we're talking about 50 grand, but it might be palatable for someone.
Yeah, but that's still like, the same sort of money you get in a Golf GTI or a Hyundai i30N. Like, it's
I know what I'd be buying on another.
Yeah, it's just, like good luck to Honda, but to me, it just seems like a tough sell.
All right, 100%. We'll talk about price tags and tough sell. We're into Peugeot territory. 3008, 508, both of them with a plug-in hybrid option coming early part of this year. 3008, $79,990. 508 fastback, just under $77,000. The electric only driving range of 60 kilometres for the 508. No, that's the 3008. The 508's 55 kilometres. That's a brand that is not on people's radar as a rule. I wonder whether these PHEVs will open people's eyes up to the Peugeot option.
Other than like diehards that maybe want new tech and care about the environment and all that kind of stuff, maybe they'll shell out 85 grand for one, but I just cannot see Joe Bloggs walking into a showroom and saying, I'll have that, thanks.
Again, it's something I've said many times, I've written many times. I think Peugeot is an underrated brand in terms of the quality of the cars.
Yep.
They're in Europe, they're an equal to Volkswagen, but here the pricing is just so skewed. It just, to me, those figures just don't make sense. Again, so like Honda, like we've seen price creep across all brands, particularly in the last couple of years with COVID and supply chain and blah, blah, blah. But it's, the reality is prices are going up, but that is a huge leap. Like, like we said at the start, it's great. Consumers are interested in hybrids. They want more hybrids. So more brands feel like they want to get a hybrid. there's not much point getting a hybrid if it's a mid-size SUV that costs the better part of $80,000.
That's right.
Because who wants to buy that?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. Well, that's the wrap up. We rattled through that dozen. Thank you, guys. And we are now going to move to our garage, which contains cars that aren't coming. They've already arrived, and we've been driving them. And Steve, I want to start off with you. One of the top sellers in the Aussie market, and a particular variant of it.
Yeah. So I've been driving the Ford Ranger FX4 Max, which is a fantastically long name.
Is it mad? Is it mad?
I wouldn't say it's mad. It obviously stands out because it's got all the cool graphics on it, because we all know Ford loves the sticker pack. But you know, obviously we're coming to the end of the life of this particular Ranger, so it is, you know, it's only a few more months until we get the new one, but it's understandable why it's such a popular car. It's a, you know, it's got the bi-turbo diesel, the 4-cylinder, so you know, it's got plenty of grunt. One of the favorite things that myself and my kids have loved about the FX4 Max is it's got the little side steps, so it's much easier to get in. They look really tough. But to be honest, you know, driving around the last week, you know, doing the school run through suburban Sydney, I'm still at a loss why people buy them as family cars.
Right.
They're just not that enjoyable to drive every day, you know, like, it's hard to park. It's like heavy steering. It just sort of shakes over the bumps, and you know, it's just, I can understand the benefits of the practicality and all that stuff, but to me, it's just like every day it sort of starts to wear on you. Cool. All right, that's interesting. Good, Justin. Thank you, Steve. Justin, move on to you. An entirely different kind of car, and a you know, a nameplate that's been around for this brand, or a suffix, put it that way, in the past. Tell us about it.
So it wasn't that long ago that the notion of a front-wheel drive BMW wasn't even a thing, right? But you know, the 1 Series came along in its most recent generation, and front-wheel drive platform and all that kind of stuff. So BMW's decided to do a front-wheel drive hot hatch, because of course, up until now, we'd had the M135i at the top of the range, and that comes with X-Drive all-wheel drive. But now we have a front-wheel drive hot hatch by the name of the 128 Ti, which is what I've been driving. Obviously, the Ti badge has been on a number of BMW models over the years, usually indicating something that's a little bit sportier, but obviously not an M car.
I think there was another I as well. There was a TII at one point. Anyway, I might be making that up.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it definitely stands out from the crowd in terms of the range, because again, it's got that M Sport package as standard, but it's got plenty of red stuff on it, trim, you know, on the bumpers, inside stitching. Can you get a BMW now these days without an M Sport package?
Great question.
Sell those?
Yeah. How do you say that? They just released a whole bunch of sport BMWs this week that weren't M Sport. So yes, you can. But anyway, M Sport package, lots of red stuff, 2-litre engine under the bonnet, 180 kilowatts, 380 newton meters. For those of you playing at home, Europe actually gets 195 kilowatts and 400 newton meters, and we still don't know why Australia doesn't. I assume it's to do with fuel potentially, or our market just didn't get prioritized. But anyway, point being, we get a slightly softer tune. But the really interesting thing about this car, which is actually really entertaining to drive, by the way, you do have to wrestle it a little bit through the corners sometimes, and puts a smile on the face. But the price, 55 grand. For a BMW hot hatch front wheel drive. A Golf GTI on the road costs more.
Right. That's right. I seem to remember a senior person at BMW once uttering the words, "We'll never have a front wheel drive car."
Yeah.
Which proves the risk of saying never. But interesting.
Yeah, the comparison though between the 128 Ti and the Golf GTI, I think in particular, like they are so closely aligned on paper in terms of price, engine specs, even in Australia, performance and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, if I was on the market for a GTI, like I just don't know how I would personally not go and buy the 1 Series instead. I mean, a lot of people would see that BMW badge and, you know, aspire to it and potentially want it for that reason, but it feels like a more quality in that car, you know. Feel like you're getting definitely a step up, particularly in the interior and the ergonomics and all those types of things. So I think as a day-to-day proposition, I know what I buy.
Cool. All right. Interesting. Thank you, Justin. I'll round it out. Another BMW actually, but this is the iX3. So this is the X3 all electric. It's just under 115K. So it's equivalent of the premium non-performance X3. Synchronous electric motor, the 1-speed reduction auto, rear-wheel drive. So that motor sits in a specific subframe at the back of the car and drives the rear wheels. 210 kilowatts, 400 newton meters, 0 to 100, 6.8. So it puts it in the ballpark in terms of a pretty rapid, very respectable kind of acceleration from that car. On the plus side, I'd say that it's normal to look at. It looks like an X3. To drive it, some of the time I was driving it, I forgot it was electric. It just feels like an X3. And that's because it's pretty good. It has adaptive dampers, and that compensates for that very low weight. Its center of gravity is about 7.5 centimeters lower than a petrol engine X3. So you've got that planted kind of feel. And I've got to say value. Now, there's a $115,000 car, but it's loaded and it competes well with other SUVs in that part of the market, and not just EVs. And you get 5 years ChargeFox charging free of charge. So you're not paying anything for energy for the first 5 years. It's got a 460 kilometre range. And I love the 20-inch rims that are on it. They look amazing, subjective thing, but I love that. The minus is it's a little bit firm in the ride. Even in the comfort setting, you do feel the bumps and things, and you can feel a bit of that weight. There's no spare, and BMW's still got a 3-year warranty. So I think that has to change sooner rather than later for them to be competitive. But I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, it sounds appealing.
Yeah, spent a week with it and I thought, wow, this is pretty good. And charging is getting easier all the time. So every day charging is getting easier. And when it's given to you for free, and ChargeFox has got 1,400 plugs, mostly on the East Coast, some in Tassie, Adelaide, Perth. So that's not a bad deal in my book. And I enjoyed driving.
If I'd have asked you 15 years ago if you reckon BMW would have a front-wheel drive hot hatch and a rear-wheel drive electric SUV,
it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting, yeah.
The changing automotive landscape.
So that's good. There's our garage, and we will now move on to comment of the week. It's on top of the shipping container at the front of the CarsGuide forecourt. It has the bunting around it, balloons. It's going to sell, and it's our old mate De Cook. He said, I've seen this Citroen, and we were talking about what do I want to call it? Help me out here, guys. The C5X. C5X. Thank you very much. C5X.
Not to be confused with the CX5, actually.
CX5, thank you very much. And that was the point we made last week. It was probably a clever plan, a cunning plan to get people shopping for this car. Anyway, he said, I've seen this Citroen in the flesh. And shout out to Planes, Trains and Dogs and Cars who criticised my pronunciation of Citroen. I think I'd said Citroen, and I'll go Citroen. I hope that's Citroen. I hope that's better. And it has a striking, funky design. I wouldn't buy it due to the Euro price premium and poor value for money, but gee, I wish more people were getting this eye candy car. As I took some pictures and walked away, a group of senior people, including the owners, came around and they seemed very glad someone liked their car so much, almost as if it was an exotic. And Planes, Trains and Dogs and Cars said, I would have it. Had the hydropneumatic suspension. Stellantis should cut Citroen some slack and build the unique cars it was famous for. So Citroen, 175 cars they sold in 2021. That's 14.6 cars per month. They've got 34 dealers. That's 0.4 of a car per dealer per month. If you're Citroen, what do you do to try and, besides spending $1 bazillion on advertising, which would help, obviously, is Citroen potentially just locked in this loop of non-consideration forever, or is there something that could be done to get people to put it on their shopping list?
I think in Australia, at this stage, they just exist for the Citroen fans out there. If you're a current owner or whatever, or you grew up in a family of them, then yeah, you go and buy one. But beyond that, I just don't know and see how they're going to attract new buyers, without a big advertising spend and all that kind of stuff, or, I just don't see them gaining any sort of traction. In fact, the only traction they're probably going to get is when they finally leave Australia, like many other brands have in recent times.
Ouch. Steve?
I just don't know how they're going to stick around.
I think even with a big ad campaign, right? If you spend $1 bazillion on an ad campaign, what are you advertising? What's their lineup? What's their USP now? I think this is a problem for brands as we've moved to this era of modular underpinnings and conglomerates. Brands need to have something to be different. There needs to be
Which
a point of difference.
It was the death of Saab with GM because GM didn't understand Saab, and they just wanted it to be a European badge, and it was so much more than that.
Peugeot is hardly, a top 5 brand in this country. Like it's still a relative minnow. And this is the same company that's trying to sell the two sort of, to use the favorite word, quirky French cars, they're selling a premium position. Like what is the difference between a Peugeot and a Citroen?
All right. Well, it'd be interesting to get our listeners and viewers' opinion on if they were ruling the Citroen roost, what would they do? Sorry, did I cut you off, Justin? You were going to say?
I was just going to say that's a good point, though, in terms of the comparison with Peugeot, right? Because again, they are such similar cars because all the models are basically related. But in Australia, we went through that recent shift not that long ago, a couple of years ago, where Peugeot sold SUVs, sold cars, sold LCVs. Citroen, apart from Berlingo, didn't, and now they've switched, and it's like, okay, Peugeot's only SUVs and cars, and Citroen's more moving towards the commercial side of things with a couple of SUVs sprinkled along the way. And it seems that is going to be confusing to a lot of people about what that brand is. But I guess maybe they just need to double down and say, we're an LCV brand because, you've got a lot of competing products otherwise. That's
an interesting thought. Maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Maybe. Anyway, let's see what people make of that. And with that, we have reached the finish line. So thank you, Steve. And
my pleasure.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
And thanks to today's producer and our digital muse, Mr. Brett Sullivan. Today, as a tribute to Mr. Pritchard, he's wearing a T-shirt saying, "I'm kind of an asshole." So it's a nice one. Jump into the conversation. Cars Guide's on Facebook and Instagram, or email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. Apple Podcast listeners, take a moment to rate and review the show. 5's the preferred number of stars. That'd be good. Thank you. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to the Cars Guide YouTube channel so you can stay on top of all our latest content. But before we go, a mate of mine told me this week that it's mandatory to have your headlights on when it's raining in Sweden. I said to him, that's madness. How the hell are we meant to know when it's raining in Sweden?
That's...
I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.